So one thing I do want to talk about is this right here. When we're looking at the state of being black in America, foundation of black Americans, or what I like to call Israelites, right? One thing to understand is that oftentimes we look to political figures to be some source of salvation for us. Oftentimes we look to celebrities to be a certain source of salvation for us. Someone who's going to fight for us, someone who is going to try to do the best they can to put the black community in the best position possible. And the truth is this, it's often not going to work like that. I'm going to be honest with you, because you have to think of the corporate America, think of the industry, think of these certain institutions as the royal family when it comes to Attack on Titan. I look at it like King Fritz's vow to renounce war, right? What you have to understand is that most black people who come to a position of prominence, a lot of them are going to be, to a certain extent, influenced or a part of the Boulé, right? Not all the time. I'm not on some super conspiracy theory shit. I'm just someone who observes my surroundings. I'm someone who observes what goes on, observes the narratives that are shared. Oftentimes it may not even always have to be a matter of they're being directly told not to do certain shit. Just sometimes there are certain mindsets that a person has in their upbringing that allows them to push certain narratives without even trying, that are damaging and harmful to our communities in a desire to put us down. Like, sometimes it's art imitating life and sometimes it's life imitating art. And I'm not somebody who's about censorship, because if you censor to one side, then the people who are in a position of power are going to censor to the other side, right? I look at it more so from a matter of, yes, there are different stories that people have to tell. Think about it like Public Enemy and NWA. There are people in a position of power to where when NWA came out, they used that to counterbalance the different positive messages that were coming out when it comes to like Public Enemy and different prolific figures. But what I also say is, just because there were certain prolific figures that spoke of what sounded like consciousness, it doesn't always mean that's what it was, because we seen things that appeared to be happening with the Africa Bambaataa situation. So it's not just straight consciousness is what it is. You have to think about that stuff. But when people get to a certain position of power within the black community, they get a certain level of money. Oftentimes they'll say certain things, but there's a certain vow to renounce war. There's a certain vow to keep the peace when it comes to things that they share, because they know that if they say certain things, if they operate a certain way, then their accounts might get cut off, they'll lose all their business. And another thing to think about is this: it's the support of the black community, the financial support of the black community, and also their physical safety, because that's something that can happen. Also, you have to think about the sexual shadow world, right? And how oftentimes, you think about the whole Pizzagate situation, and there are people who engage in certain acts in order to get to a position of prominence, because certain things kind of work like pacts, you know what I mean? Where, back in the day when people would make a certain vow or a pact, they would, maybe cut their hand and they would do a blood pact. I'm not saying that's something I agree with, but oftentimes it's like a gang initiation. These things work on a variety of levels. If you have to kill someone to enter into a gang, then you have to understand that you're already kind of in too deep to then try to back up out of it and then think that everything's going to be cool. Either you're going to have to be killed to leave. But another thing to understand is sometimes people have a certain level of dirt on you as you're rising up through the ranks of the industrial ladder. And as you're climbing up those ranks, it's like a frog in a pot, where you have to do a plethora of things that starts off small, and you work your way up through doing things that are depraved, doing things that would go against what your morals and your standards and your values are, or at least the moral standards and values of your fan base. And if they were to go against that, then those things may come out. And if they go against that and those things come out, then they may get canceled, right? Or they might end up going to jail. So we have to understand that we can't look to celebrities a lot of the times as the people who are going to be there for us to help us grow within the black community, because oftentimes they're speaking from a place of social programming, or they're already agents who are put in certain positions to further denigrate the community, whether it's as far as relationships, whether it's as far as our career fields and our dynamics. Another thing to understand is this: there are some people who did what they had to do to get where they were. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's all the way wrong. What I'm saying is some people had to do some shit to get to a certain position to where they would have the resources. And it's not really about shitting on those people and always talking down on them either, because sometimes those are going to be the people who will give you money behind the scenes to let you know that they support what you're doing. It's just they can't be out in the open about it. They can't be out in the open about the different things that are going to help us progress as a people, right? These are just something to understand. And I look at this from the terms of King Fritz vow to renounce war. Everybody who had the founding Titan within the bloodline of the Fritz family, within Attack on Titan, they had this internal thing in them that caused them to renounce war. And within that, they would use the power of the founding Titan to brainwash the Eldians so that they would be in a position of subservience, so that they would think that they were the only people on the planet, so that they wouldn't take up arms to try to protect themselves from the Marleyans. Right? But something else to understand is this: sometimes your numbers aren't at a certain place, right? As black people, we don't have the numbers, and we don't have the capabilities really to go to war. And it's not about just wanting to go to war and just wanting to fight and wanting to put our families in harm's way. It's not necessarily about that. But this is a war that more so takes place not as far as being violently aggressive, except for situations where that's necessary. It's more so about saying that we need to put ourselves first as far as doing business within our own community. And if someone supports us, they support us, and we can work with them. But we have to understand that just because something's white doesn't mean it's right. Just because, black people in general, we're very accommodating people. We're very open and accepting people. But sometimes we do that to our detriment with people who aren't going to afford us that same benefit of the doubt, with people who aren't going to give us those same opportunities to open up businesses within their communities, with people who aren't going to patron our communities, with people who are going to come into our communities and then they're not going to put money into our schools. They're not going to put money into the small businesses in our areas. They are going to pretty much take up space where other black businesses could be. And yet to, hold the city planners, different people in small government more accountable for that stuff. Because something to understand is that the big government is not really something you could do anything about. To a certain extent, that shit's already orchestrated. But when it comes to smaller government, right, that's where things become more important. You have to think about your school district. You have to think about different things that go along with that, right? So when we're looking at just from a political worldview, we have to understand that most of the time, a lot of black people who reach a certain position of power, they're there for a reason. Not everybody. I'm not going to say it's everybody, because some people, they work their fucking ass off. They work their ass off. And they got to a position where they could do certain things that they wanted. But even then, there's a certain lack of insulation and protection within our community for people who reach a certain place. Because a lot of black people don't have the money, or we're not smart with our money, and we don't seek to use our money to support those who help us. And if we don't use our money to support the people within our own community who are trying to do something different, then they don't have any choice but to stick to the script, right? Do you really think that somebody should take a stance of letting their own family be hungry, right? Letting their own family be in jeopardy for some niggas who don't even give a fuck about them? Like, do you really think that's realistic? Especially when they work so hard to get to a certain position. I'm not saying that I'm giving people a pass for being a sellout. But what I am saying is this: if you can't sell yourself, you got to sell yourself out somewhere. And if you ain't selling yourself out to your own community or to God, and you're not doing it, and you can't do it in a way to where your bills are going to be paid and your family is going to be safe and you're going to be protected and insulated, then shut the fuck up about being so against those people. Sometimes those are going to be the people who go get the bag, and they're going to come back and they're going to share that, right? Just like sometimes back in the day, there would be certain drug dealers that would be doing their work, and they knew that it was wrong to a certain extent what they were doing, depending on what they were selling. But then they would be some of the people who would come back around, and they would support people who are coming pushing consciousness to the next community. They would come and bring that money back to churches who are doing the right things. Sometimes the wealth of the wicked will go to the righteous. So it's not about just shitting on those people either. You got to speak truth, and speak truth to power. But at the same time, we have to be aware of certain things. And oftentimes when people reach a certain position, it kind of works like what I say is King Fritz's renouncel of the vow of renouncing war. When black people oftentimes reach a certain position of power, that's where they're at. And oftentimes we don't see what's going on behind the scenes, and certain people aren't conscious, so they just look at these celebrities and they put them on such a pedestal about where they are. But then there's people who are conscious, and they have such this vitriol towards these people. But I think it's important to understand that. But there's going to be people who are coming up who are putting themselves in a position of power, where they're putting themselves in a financial position, where they're doing that in a more grassroots way. They're not a member of that Fritz family. They didn't come up through the industry or the corporate ladder. They didn't come up through the Boulé. They're just out here on some grassroots shit. And black people are getting more money, and black people are being in a position where we're starting to be conscious enough to support each other financially and to protect each other. And there's certain gangs who are starting to decide to not be at odds with each other so much, because it's about our communities. And when we understand these particular things, then you start to get to a place where there's a certain level of insulation. Now, we're not in a place for war, and I'm not even saying war is what I want. I'm not saying that's what we want. I'm not saying that's what we need. But what I am saying is that it's a matter of insulating and protecting ourselves. You know, I talk about integration and premature integration all the time. See, premature integration, it somewhat relates to segregation and desegregation, right? When you try to integrate with someone when you're not in alignment, where they don't see you as an equal, right? Or they don't see you as a person who has true value, then at least when you're separated, you can work on your value and increase yourself. You can increase your knowledge of yourself. You can increase your confidence. You can increase the things that you have to offer. You can set your standards and set your boundaries about the way that someone needs to treat you. And when you integrate, when you're at a place of still seeing that those individuals is better than you, and on a business level, then you're setting yourself up to be taken advantage of and disenfranchised and subtly disrespected, and in ways to where when you used to be conscious of it, you know, you could see exactly what was going on. But then some people are going to stick their heads in the sand and think that, oh, everybody's just together now. Everybody's just together now. Yes, you know, on a one-to-one basis, we can have some really good white friends, some really good white families, some really good people who are outside of our community who we love and we cherish, and we know that those are good people. But you have to understand that there's a difference between an agenda and an individual, right? There's a difference between an agenda and an individual. And there's a difference between ideologues and identity. You know what I mean? There's a difference between ideologues and love between individual people, between smaller communities that respect and adore one another, right? There's a difference. And you got to understand that within certain pervasive thought processes, that we have to prioritize our own communities. This is why I try to speak a lot pro-black. That's why most of my pictures and thumbnails for my videos have mostly black people, because I'm not anti anybody, right? I'm pro my people. And some people say, oh, you know, my people is the human race. And I do believe that to an extent. You know, I love everybody. But I also understand that when you try to take this mindset of it's all about everybody, and everybody saying, yeah, it is, but behind the scenes, they're about, no, it's about my people first. Then when you're about everybody, when everybody is about them, then you're going to be taken advantage of. And it works the same way with premature integration when it comes to relationships. You know, this stuff relates to a lot more than just sex and relationships. So, you know, this is about, you know, King Fritz's vow of renouncing war, or King Fritz's vow, and black people in power. This is Brody. I'm out.